Friends, I welcome you to my channel. Before listening to this story, I will ask you to like and subscribe. It is not difficult for you, but it is pleasant for me. And we're starting. Davy, if you don't water these plants soon, they will go and die right on top of you. It was Kevin Morris telling me what I already knew. Everything my sister planted last spring has wilted from neglect. It seems like I just didn't care enough about watering them. She probably spent a small fortune on those roses under the windows, not to mention the time she spent planting them in the flower boxes that my ex-wife and I built. My sister Jane thought that roses could cheer me up and get me out of depression. That's not going to happen. May these damn flowers die, as well as my wife's love for me. Dead, as is my good friend Stuart Olson. We just buried Stuart today. Kevin and I gave eulogies. There wasn't a dry eye in the chapel after Kevin finished his 10-minute speech. Then it was my turn. We planned it this way. Kevin brought them to tears, so I did my best to cheer them up by telling a couple of stories from our time in the band. Kevin, Stuart, and I composed The Yonder Blues Road. We were doing well at the regional level. We were busy almost all weekend and quite a few weekdays to attract a lot of fans. It was there that I met Sandy, a gorgeous blonde stunner who became my wife. At that moment, it dawned on me. Today was just the year when I saw that terrible expression on her face and heard her version of, "We need to talk." Could this really happen today? The 1-year anniversary of the breakup of my marriage and the funeral of my best friend on the same day. All this flashed through my mind in a matter of seconds while I unscrewed the lids from 2 bottles of beer. Kevin took a Jack Daniels from the shelf and poured 2 servings. Kevin raised his glass. "Salute." "Salute," I replied to his toast in honor of our friend, who was half Swedish, half Italian, and a long-suffering Vikings fan. We had a shot of Jack and started drinking beer. "Hey Davy, your hand is bleeding." I looked down, and of course I must have cut my finger when I unscrewed the lids from the beer bottles. I grabbed a towel from the bar and wrapped it around the wound before going to the bathroom where I keep a first aid kit. When I unwrapped the towel, I noticed the embroidery. Davy and Sandy, August 3rd, 2005. May you always love each other as much as on your wedding day. Her grandmother sewed and gave us a set of these ornaments as a wedding gift. I don't think Sandy bothered to take them with the rest of what she dragged out of here last year. Kevin noticed the look on my face when I came back from the bath. "I was going to go home, but would you like me to stay? Shall we have another drink?" "No, buddy. Go home to your wife. These are always difficult days for spouses. Hug Patty for me and give her my love." With that, Kevin walked away, leaving me to reflect on how everything in my life turned to shit. The Yonder Blues Road played in a small tavern in Madison. We had a crowd that night. A lot of covers were perfectly combined with some of our original tunes, good old blues and rock. Stuart on drums, Kevin on bass and keyboards, and I sang and played guitar. A beautiful Les Paul signed by the man himself. It was supposed to be on the wall in my office, but Mr. Paul himself told me that it would be a shame not to play such a beautiful instrument, which I did. Speaking of beauty, there in the crowd was the same blonde who was here 6 weeks ago when we last performed in this bar. At least I couldn't miss her. She was about 170 centimeters tall, with long blonde hair, a sweet smile, and an amazing body, covered in a tight t-shirt and skinny jeans. And when she danced, I almost got hard, which is not so bad for a rocker. So many girls just go crazy when a singer shows up there with a tent in his pants. Anyway, that evening I did what we did only on very rare occasions, and only when there was a lady with the right physique and dance moves in the hall. Do you remember Bruce Springsteen's Dancing in the Dark video, where Bruce invites a random girl, who just happened to be Courtney Cox before she became famous in Friends, on stage to dance? Well, that's what I did to the blonde when we were doing a cover of a Springsteen song. And she did it. She danced, we played, and the crowd went crazy. She was still at the bar when the band finished their second and final encore. You don't have to hit me over the head with a brick to know that this lady was waiting for me. Kevin and Stuart gave me a break from dismantling gear. There are no roadies in the small business rock scene, while I headed to the bar to introduce myself. We chatted for a few minutes before she gave me her phone number, asking me to call. Weeks later, the band had another gig scheduled at a club in Madison. I called Sandy and asked if she was free for a real date on Friday, since we were playing on Saturday. She said yes, and I booked a table at one of the best restaurants and bought tickets to the University Symphony Orchestra. I picked Sandy up at her house, and she looked absolutely gorgeous in her little black dress and heels. Nothing slutty, just stylish. I was glad that I was wearing a nice sports jacket and I shaved off the usual stubble from my face. Our conversation at dinner was easy. We just got to know each other, our likes and dislikes. Sandy held my hand during the concert. She said I chose the right one. Beethoven was her favorite composer, and the Third Symphony was one of his two that she liked the most. She said she was surprised that the blues rock guitarist chose the symphony. I had to admit that in my youth I took violin lessons for 8 years and 4 years in our school chamber orchestra. I also admitted that I picked up a guitar because when I was a horny teenager, girls loved guitarists more than concert violinists. Sandy laughed heartily at this. After the concert, I took Sandy to a quiet lounge for a drink and then returned to her house. As we stood in the doorway, I told her how much I enjoyed her company and asked if she would be at the tavern on Saturday. "Will you be at the club tomorrow night, or can we have a cup of coffee after I'm done?" "I'm sorry, Davy, I'm not going to lie to you. I have plans for tomorrow night, and it wouldn't be fair to him to cancel the meeting so late. I just had a great evening with you, but justice is justice. I hope we can do it again soon." I was disappointed. It was one of the best nights I've had in a long time. I thought we really got along. But I held my tongue, not wanting to spoil a pleasant evening with too harsh statements. I kissed her quickly and left. The next night, I tried my best not to let disappointment affect our show, but I know it lacked energy because no one really cared when the last set ended without an encore, and we left the stage by 11. After loading the equipment into the truck, I set off to get rid of my fear. It turned out to be a bad idea, because when I was leaving the local coffee shop with a cup of coffee, I saw Sandy and some guy coming out of a jazz club across the street. The guy looked very familiar, probably an athlete given his height and build. They seemed very close. It's enough that Sandy didn't notice me. I was sitting at one of the sidewalk tables and watching them walk down the block. There was no way I would have stooped to follow them, but there was no need, since they only walked half a block before entering a nice apartment building. I sat there finishing my coffee and feeling sorry for myself before going down to that building and looking at the list of names next to the call buttons. The name caught my eye, B. Johnston. That's why he seemed familiar to me. Benjamin, or more commonly known as Benny, Johnston was an All-American running back who was drafted by the New York Jets right after graduating from his senior year at Wisconsin. It was a pretty upscale building in the business district for a college stud. I sat there finishing my coffee and feeling sorry for myself before going down to that building and looking at the list of names next to us. I didn't stop to see if Sandy had stayed the night. I did what any self-respecting guy would do. I found a late-night bar, ordered a double shot of whiskey, picked up a girl who recognized the rock star, and took her to my hotel room for the night. The next morning, I got into my car and headed home with the intention of completely forgetting about Sandy. I was almost expecting a call from Sandy within the next week and was somewhat surprised when I didn't receive one. What I didn't know was that Sandy's younger sister, Alice, a 16-year-old wild child, was found dead on the New York subway that Sunday. An obvious overdose victim whose friends got scared and just left her there. I learned about this family tragedy much later. While Sandy was dealing with her sad family problems, I didn't notice anything, assuming that Sandy had made a better deal with a wealthy professional athlete. I immersed myself in the work and the group. We started getting more orders in the greater Chicagoland area, so we no longer made trips to Madison or western Wisconsin. Sandy has become a distant memory. The memory came back one evening when our band was playing at a club on Belmont Avenue. I looked around the crowd and saw Sandy. Since she wasn't looking at me at the time, I quickly looked away. At the next opportunity, I told Kevin and Stuart that I was changing the playlist, and we started with Dancing in the Dark. But instead of asking Sandy to come on stage, I noticed a blonde beauty in the audience and asked her to come up. I tried my best to flirt with the blonde, while she tried her best to behave beautifully. She wasn't bad, but not Sandy. When the song ended, I looked around the crowd again. Sandy was nowhere to be seen. My petty act of retaliation must have achieved its goal, but for some reason I didn't get the pleasure I hoped for. I decided to take a chance. Her number was still in my phone's contact list. I sent a message on Monday morning. Kevin said he noticed you on Saturday. Is there a reason you didn't say hello? 10 minutes later, the answer came. You seemed busy. I didn't want to interfere. Are you in town? Can we have some coffee? I work in the administration of the Northwestern Memorial, and I have a flexible schedule, so tell me when. Then how about lunch? Gino at noon on Superior? Yes. That was the beginning of our relationship. We met for lunch, and Sandy told me why she disappeared that week because of her sister's death. When she asked why I hadn't called, I came up with an unconvincing excuse that I was overworked that week, and that since she hadn't called me, I decided she had more important things to do. She never mentioned Benny Johnston, and neither did I. Probably because it would reflect badly on me. Was I stalking her? I knew I wasn't stalking, but what would she think? It wasn't the best way to start a relationship. A few innocent lies and evasions on my part. A few things she left unsaid. Since lunch seemed to be a success, I invited her to the symphony orchestra on Thursday. Midori was supposed to play Dvorak's concerto for violin and orchestra, and I had access to several great places. Sandy said she'd love to go, and we've been a couple since that night. Our physical relationship took several weeks to come to an end. It was after a Sunday afternoon shopping trip on Michigan Avenue. Sandy asked me if she could spare half an hour for herself, and went into Victoria's Secret. We had a light dinner at her house, and then she disappeared into the bedroom. The lights were dimmed and a couple of candles were burning there. Sandy started undressing me until I was naked. She sat down on the bed. We really had more chances, both that weekend and the following days and nights. Sandy and I have discovered that we have quite a lot in common. Between my work as a systems analyst and band rehearsals, playing clubs on weekends only increased the time spent away from each other. Plus, even though Sandy said she trusted me, the whole fan thing was a problem. Despite these problems, we still managed to get engaged a few months after we became exclusive. I proposed one summer evening, right after a great Siegel Schwall reunion concert in Grant Park. Sandy said yes between kisses. I have booked a nice room in the city center for this occasion. We celebrated our engagement in a room overlooking the lake with the curtains open. We made love and then we sat in bed. She looked at me with her beautiful blue eyes. I love your touch. That's good, because I have a firm intention to play with this body for the rest of my life. I was in heaven. At least until 6 weeks later when the Jets came to Chicago to play the Bears in a preseason game. On the Thursday before the game, Sandy was very silent while we had dinner. To make matters worse, she came up with some excuse to meet for a drink with her colleagues on Friday night after work. Alarm bells rang in my head and light bulbs lit up. Sandy came in around 10 o'clock at night and was still very quiet. After she fell asleep, I found her panties and sniffed them. I was glad that I didn't smell any male ejaculation or any female arousal. Maybe after all I had nothing to worry about, but I kept my feelings in good shape for the rest of the weekend. I was even more pleased when I checked her email while she was sleeping. There was a text from Benny begging her to see him again before he had to leave town with the team. Her reply read, "It's over between them. She's engaged. She loves her fiancé and agreed to meet him on Friday just to tell him to his face." She asked him never to contact her again. 3 weeks later, an event happened that changed my life. Yonder Blues Road was playing in a great dive bar in Kankakee when 5 or 6 members of the Joliet motorcycle gang showed up. The band had just finished their second set when there was a commotion in the back of the bar. Most of the bar patrons were trying to figure out what was going on, but I was in a hurry to get a beer, so I stood with my back to the fight. Suddenly, I heard a distinctive click behind me. Before I could react, I heard another sound that I couldn't identify and felt a sharp pain in my arm. It turns out that the click was the sound of a switchblade opening. One of the bikers was going to stab me in the back. For what reason, I couldn't imagine. The second sound I heard was Kevin's bass guitar hitting the biker in the back when he saw him coming at me with a knife. Kevin hit him hard enough that the knife missed its target. The cut on my arm wasn't serious, but it was deep enough that I needed 12 stitches in the emergency room. Needless to say, this was the last straw for Sandy. I had to leave the band, otherwise there would have been no wedding. The biker never confessed why he was targeting me. As a result, he received 5 years in prison on a number of charges related to the incident. It was all strange. Was something wrong? And it seemed like the whole episode was staged specifically to get through to me. Or was I being paranoid? Years later, I found out the truth. The band had a few shows that couldn't be canceled without significant monetary penalties, so we renamed these last 6 shows the Goodbye Yonder Blues Road Tour. And then I broke up looking forward to life with Sandy, getting married, buying a house, renovating it, and turning it into our home. We enjoyed marital happiness for over 2 years when everything went awry. Sandy felt she was stuck in her job and had very little hope of promotion over the next few years. She was in her late 30s, and she wanted to wait a few more years before having children. At the same time, she hoped to make a decent career. Sandy unsuccessfully contacted all the hospitals in the area. She got a call from a human resources hunter with a great perspective. St. Jude Children's Hospital in Memphis was interested in talking to her. We discussed this in detail. I could probably start looking for a job in the Memphis area, but it may take some time before anything opens up in my area. Will our marriage remain strong if we live apart for a few months or so? Other couples have done it, so why not us? As a result, Sandy was interviewed, received a favorable offer, and unfortunately, we decided to live in different cities for a while. It might have worked if it wasn't for one hitch. 2 weeks after Sandy moved to Memphis, Benny Johnston was traded from the Jets to the Titans. Nashville and Memphis are 300 kilometers apart. Otherwise, I could have taken more initiative. Hell, I could just quit my job and move there. But I let the events that eventually led to the breakup of my marriage happen, because although I thought 300 kilometers would be an obstacle to chasing Benny Sandy, he didn't think it was too far to travel. Something else happened during our separation. I received an email from Sandy's college friend. I learned about this website from an old friend. At first, I thought the girl in the video was young Sandy, but then I realized that it must be her sister. I didn't know how to approach Sandy, so I'm asking for your help in removing this from the website. The letter contained a link to an adult website. I hesitated before finally taking a look. I've never met Alice, but I've seen the photos. The young woman in the video was definitely Alice, and the first part of the video showed Alice with a woman in a situation. I didn't watch the rest. I didn't want to, but I needed a family member with access to her birth certificate to contact the website and delete the video of the underage Alice. Sandy was shocked when I told her. She deleted the video, which saved her parents from another unpleasant reminder of what their little daughter had become. Soon after, the relationship deteriorated. I assumed that we would reconnect after we lived together again. I sent out more resumes to Memphis companies hoping to get offers. When Benny found out from mutual friends that Sandy was living alone in Memphis, he started his campaign. I do not know all the details, only the end result. In the 3rd month of our separation, I flew to Memphis for an interview with the company. Sandy met me at the airport, and it was obvious that something was wrong. My interview was successful, and I was offered a job. I took a taxi to Sandy's apartment, and when I walked in, I heard these sad words. "Davy, I'm sorry, honey, we need to talk." Part of my depression after the divorce was self-loathing for never being completely honest with Sandy. I never knew how to approach the topic of her relationship with Benny, the superstar of professional football. I'm not slouching physically. I have a decent body. I am 185 centimeters athletic, handsome enough to attract ladies. But how can any guy compare to a 190 centimeter tall, 110 kilogram millionaire who is strong enough to play professional baseball? So I probably did the worst thing anyone else could have done without discussing the elephant in the room. To understand what demons Sandy was dealing with regarding Benny, and to calm those demons by speaking out about it. A year later, I was stuck in my gloom, letting the breakdown of my marriage continue to weigh on me. I did not accept a job offer from a Memphis company and stayed here in Chicago. Sandy and I divorced, and she moved in with Benny. Stuart was hit by a drunk driver while riding a motorcycle home from work. The past year has dragged on too slowly. Why does time speed up when everything is going so fantastically, but slows down in difficult days, months, years? It just seems unfair. One good thing did happen a month after Stuart's memorial service. Kevin played bass in the local hot blues band, the John Reginald Group. They were in the middle of recording when their guitarist was arrested for dealing illegal substances. Kevin told John that I was free. John was familiar with my game and called me to see if it was right for me. As they say, I auditioned and took a leave of absence from work to help the band finish the CD. I once endeared John to me when I suggested using an electric violin in one of the rooms. The next day, I brought my violin into the studio, turned on my best dad, John Creech, and played it back. The band and producer liked it, and the track was released on CD. Maybe it was the endorphins released that week in the studio. But suddenly everything started to look a little brighter again. The new attitude probably had a lot to do with what happened next. My sister Jane hosted a dinner party and introduced me to a woman from her job. Kate Morgan can only be described as a breath of fresh air. We sat next to each other during dinner. My sister is not stupid, and I probably monopolized her time to the point that I was rude to the rest of Jane's guests. It turned out that the others were just pleased to see me in such a good mood for a change. It's nice to have great friends. I did my best to find out everything I could about this pretty brunette, besides what was physically striking. Her brown eyes, bright smile, athletic physique hidden under a conservative dress. She was 24 years old, and a year ago she graduated from graduate school with an MBA in finance. She worked with my sister last year and appreciated the way my sister mentored her. Most importantly, she wasn't dating anyone at the moment. Before Kate left, I invited her out for the following weekend. I must have done something right that night because she agreed to a date the following Saturday night. I will not bore the reader with all the details. I will only say that one date led to a second, a third, and many others. I introduced Kate to my family, and she introduced me to her parents over the weekend, 2 months after we started dating. Kate came from a small town in Indiana, and her parents were quite conservative Catholics. For the first time since graduating from high school, I went to church for Sunday Mass. I learned a lot about Kate that weekend, about things she was too modest to talk about herself. Her parents were very proud of their only child and more than cared for her. You could see the pride when her mother and father talked about Kate graduating from high school with a valedictory speech, becoming prom queen and captain of the volleyball team. She received a full scholarship to Loyola and graduated from college as a welcoming student. Up to this point, Kate and I had limited ourselves to kissing and sometimes very hot cuddling, but she wanted to take her time with the physical aspect of our relationship. She said that she would not enter into a relationship with me until she realized that we love each other and that this is something more than a passion. No matter how hard it was, I liked this woman so much that I respected her wishes. More than once, I returned home after a date with Kate. On the way home from her parents' house, she spent 3 hours answering my questions and filling in the blanks. I found out that she had a close relationship with only 2 men. She dated the latter for 3 years during college. She knew she was different from most women of our generation, but she was comfortable with herself. She knew that many men stopped asking her out after a couple of dates because she wouldn't give in to their demands, and that was one of the things she loved. Yes, she used the word love. In me, that I respected her and didn't force her to be someone she wasn't. I told her that sometimes it can be difficult to give up the intimacy of a physical relationship that I would like us to share. But I loved her. I used this word for the first time in front of her, and hoped that someday soon we would be able to share something more than kisses. For this, Kate kissed me hard on the cheek as we raced along the freeway at 110 kilometers per hour. I really believe that we would have ended our relationship that evening if it hadn't been for the fact that Kate had a 6:30 flight the next morning, and she still needed to pack up and get some rest. The last thing I wanted was to rush the moment. I drove Kate to her apartment, hugged her tightly, and kissed her better. It was going to be a long week until she got home on Friday. We agreed that I would pick her up at O'Hare on Friday and we would have dinner at our favorite restaurant. During the same week, it became impossible to ignore what was happening in my ex-wife's life. The sports page was filled with news about the release of Benjamin Johnston from the Titans because he failed another test for banned substances. To make matters worse for dear old Benny, he was arrested that evening for domestic violence, violent rage. The newspapers didn't name the victim, but Benny hit his roommate, and he ended up in jail. I admit that I feel sorry for Sandy. She may have been a piece of shit for leaving me for Benny, but I don't think anyone deserves to be physically abused by their spouse. My relationship with Kate was now so strong that by Friday I was barely thinking about the Sandy situation when I met Kate at the baggage carousel with a dozen red roses in her hand. Kate almost knocked them out of my hands when she jumped into my arms and gave me the most passionate kisses. "I've booked a table at Charlie's. Let's take your bag and go to the city." Kate surprised me with her answer. "If we go out to dinner, these flowers may start to fade. I have a better idea. Let's get a couple of Italian steaks to take away and eat at your place. I've missed you and I want to be alone with you." We took the food and went to my house. We discussed our jobs. Kate's trip was a success and may lead to a promotion in the near future. After eating, drinking, and talking, Kate got straight to the point. "Take me to bed, Davy. I want to make love to you tonight." We really made love. We took our time. When I undressed her, I couldn't help but smile. "What's so funny?" Kate looked offended. "It's not funny. I'm smiling like a fool because you have a beautiful body, and I've been dying to see it since that night at my sister's. Now that I can, I do not know whether to just watch or just hold it. It's hard to do both at the same time." "Make love to this one," was her reply. I didn't waste any time. It was slow and loving. I filled the tub and we took a swim together. Kate seemed shy at first, but I didn't let her back down. I made her get into the tub with me. We talked a little more about what that night meant to us. When the water cooled down, I wiped us dry with a towel and took her back to bed. We made love again and fell asleep wrapped in each other's blankets. When Kate woke up the next morning, I was already awake, just lying there and looking at this beauty. Kate woke up and looked at me in embarrassment. "This is the first time in my life that I've slept naked. It was great. What do you want to do today? I hope we can spend the whole weekend together. Let's go to the park. I really need to run after a week of traveling. You'll probably be running around in circles around me. We can run if you promise not to burn out like you usually do. There are other exercises that I would like to focus on tonight." "Agreed. I'm going to go home to get my running gear and some clothes if we're going to spend the weekend here." Soon after, Kate left, refusing my offer of a ride. She took a taxi to her house and was supposed to be back in a couple of hours. I spent the next hour doing the usual weekend chores, wanting the house to look nice for Kate's return. An hour after she left, the doorbell rang. I was excited. Kate must have been so eager to get back that she cut the expected time in half. I opened the door and got a very unexpected surprise. "Hi, Sandy." "Hi, Davy. Can I come in?" I could only nod and step aside when Sandy, looking as beautiful as ever, walked through the door for the first time since she packed her personal belongings almost a year and a half ago. When I closed the door, Sandy hugged me. "Davy, I was a fool, and I'm so sorry. I love you and I want us to be together again. I want to be your wife again." Most of the two-part Lies About Love is written in the first person as described by Davy. The short section below is written in the third person to give the reader a little insight into Kate's character. Kate is loosely based on my best friend's wife, a very nice girl from a small town, one of the sweetest ladies I know, who has kept a smile on my friend's face from the big city for the 25 years that they have been married. They seem just as in love and happy today as they did the day I was best man at their wedding. Kate in this story should not be confused with the pseudonym Kate, which I use for my series of stories about Kate the housewife. Catherine Morgan grew up always trying to be a good girl, someone her parents would be proud to call their daughter. That's why, when her friends in high school told her about an actress named Katie Morgan, she immediately forbade anyone to call her Katie, and from that day on she began to be called Kate. The hardest part was convincing her father, until she finally broke down and told him why. They both blushed, and Dad never called her Katie again. And Kate was a good girl. Until last night, she had only had 2 men in her life. The first was her boyfriend from high school. They both lost their virginity on the night of the prom. Instead of going to an all-night party, Jeffrey booked a hotel room in the city, and they spent a pleasant night awkwardly losing their cherries. The other man was a guy she dated for 3 years in college. Their lovemaking was enjoyable. It was a combination of factors. It was now obvious to Kate that Howard was shallow, at least compared to Jeffrey or Davy, and Howard never tried to kiss her down there like Davy did last night. Kate tried to stop Davy last night. Her first night with Davy surpassed anything that had happened in 3 years with Howard. When Kate left Davy's house in the morning, she was already planning their wedding. She was glad that they waited to make love until she realized that she was absolutely in love with Davy and was sure that he had the same feelings for her. Everything that happened last night exceeded all her expectations. She planned to make love to Davy when she returned from this last business trip. It made the ride seem slow as molasses. What she didn't expect was that she would enjoy love so much, spending an hour with him in the bathtub naked, sleeping next to him, pressing naked bodies against each other. It was also exciting for a girl who had kept her sensuality in reserve all her life. Kate entered her apartment and threw a week's supply of work clothes on the bed. She ran around the apartment, collecting sports equipment and enough casual clothes for the next 2 days. Grabbing her pajamas, she stopped, looked at it in her hand, and smiled as she tossed it back into the drawer. "It's not necessary," she thought to herself. Kate stopped in a hurry long enough to water the indoor plants, and then carried the suitcase to her car and drove to Davy's house, trying her best to keep the speed limit and not run through a red light. When she turned onto Davy Street, she was brought out of her euphoria by a sight that almost crushed her. A red Honda with Tennessee license plates was parked in the driveway. Kate didn't stop. She continued to drive, but now with tears instead of a smile on her face. While Kate drove past Davy's house, Davy and Sandy were inside, discussing all the things that should have been said before their divorce. Davy finishes his story. I looked at Sandy. She was still beautiful, even with one black eye. "Tell me why, Sandy. Tell me why you left me for the guy who ends up beating you up." I was so mad at you after you showed me the Alice video. It doesn't make any sense now, but at the time, I blamed you for bringing it to my attention. It was another thing that broke my heart because of my little sister. I always thought that maybe I hadn't done enough to help her. I projected my inability to save her onto you. At the same time, Benny started calling me just to talk. When I told him about the video, he assumed that you were spending your free time watching adult films instead of looking for a job in Memphis. Benny said a lot of things that shook my confidence in our relationship. He told me that it was common knowledge that the reason you were stabbed by that gang member was because you were using his lady. I let Sandy chat for a while, thinking about how this whole nightmare reminded me of some B movie I'd seen on TV late at night. Then I said my word. Stay here. I want to show you something. I went to my office and selected 2 files. Sandy, first here's a printout of the email that Jason Taylor sent me. You can read that it was he who notified me about the video. I saved a copy of his email in case I was ever suspected of watching movies. Notice how Jason calls the old friend who gave him the website address? When I ran into Jason last year, he told me the name of his friend. It was Benjamin Johnston. Sandy sat with her mouth open. I didn't let up. Here's the report from the private investigator I hired after talking to Jason. Something doesn't add up about the biker who tried to stab me that night. Go ahead and read the statement he received from one of the gang that was in the bar that night. I, Samuel Archer, a private investigator hired by David Newman, met with Daniel Bailey, a member of the Diablos motorcycle gang based in Joliet. Mr. Bailey provided the following statement for a fee of $500. Although he was adamant that he would never repeat this statement to law enforcement or under oath, Mr. Bailey confirmed that Benjamin Johnston paid him and his associates $7,500 for the murder of David Newman. The gang made the mistake of entrusting this task to a certain Joseph Burns as part of his initiation into a gang member. The plan was simple. Start a fight at one of the clubs where Mr. Newman's band was performing, and Mr. Burns would use the chaos to kill Mr. Newman with a knife. Mr. Burns failed because of the quick reaction of Kevin Morris, the bass player. Sandy finished reading and looked at me again with tears in her eyes. The only thing I never found out is why your boyfriend never made a second attempt. Sandy replied, well, it was around the time Benny started dating that hip-hop diva. He probably forgot about me for a while, at least until she dumped him when he was sold to the Titans. And that's when he started contacting you again? Yes, and I was stupid enough to answer his calls because he said he needed a friend to talk to. He used my friendship to undermine our marriage, and I let him do it. Will you ever be able to forgive me? Can I please come home? I love you, Davy. I was looking at one of the most beautiful women I've ever known. The woman I loved with all my heart. A woman who needed a friend, my forgiveness, and my love now more than ever in her life. My heart and soul begged me to be that friend, that lover, and that man big enough to forgive her lapse in judgment when she broke our vows and left me for another man. And damn it, she must have undone those 2 top buttons on her sundress while I was in my office. I put my arm around her shoulders and pulled her to me. I forgive you, Sandy. I kissed her on the forehead. Sandy looked at me with all the hope in the world in those beautiful blue eyes. I forgive you and wish you all the best in the future, but maybe one day you will understand that love is not a letter word that you use to get your way. I'm not saying this to offend you, but I'm really in love with a wonderful woman I plan to marry, and we'll start a family together. She became my mainstay in this stupid world. She brought me back from the brink. I'm not going to betray her trust because right now you need me. I don't want you to get hurt, so please don't go back to Benjamin. Take some time, as I did, to get my bearings and recover. Physically, mentally, and spiritually. I wish you all the best. Sandy couldn't stand it. She was lying on the couch, shaking and sobbing until I decided to call her parents. They came. I explained that I accepted her apology, forgave her for leaving me because of a jerk, but refused to take her back. Fortunately, her parents understood. They took her in their arms and took her to their home. After Sandy left with her parents, I looked at my watch. It was already past 3 in the afternoon. Kate was supposed to be here a few hours ago. I dialed Kate's number and waited for her to answer. It was the longest 15 seconds of my life. The epilogue. When Kate answered the phone, she seemed distant. I asked her if I could pick her up. I needed to go to the mall and I was hoping she could come with me. I needed her opinion before buying a gift for a special friend. Kate seemed reluctant but agreed. I went to her house. She got out, got into my car, and we were at the mall 20 minutes before it closed. I took her to a jewelry store and she looked confused. I knelt down. "Please choose your ring and marry me." Kate fell to her knees and hugged me. She kissed me like I'd never been kissed before. It took another 5 minutes before we got up from our knees. She chose a very simple design with a half-carat diamond, of course. I told the saleswoman to put a full carat in the frame, and I'll pick it up tomorrow. I toured with John Reginald's band for 2 months during our engagement. This tour got me out of the habit of traveling, and no, I didn't sleep with any fans, but the music bug stayed with me. Shortly after our wedding, Katie and I moved to Austin, where I work full-time in systems development. This allows me the flexibility to spend a few hours a month as a session guitarist and violinist. Oh, and plenty of time to be a proud and caring dad to the 3 kids Katie and I are lucky enough to have. Yes, you read it right. At the wedding, her father came up to her and asked, "Now that your last name is Newman, is it okay if I call my little girl Katie again?" The sweetest woman I know cried when she told her father that everything was fine. All these years later, I still find myself singing that stupid Dean Martin tune. How lucky can one guy be? I kissed her and she kissed me. As one guy once said, "Isn't that a blow to the head?" End.